Happy October, ghosts and ghouls. It's October, it is officially spooky season, whether that means that you are diving headfirst into horror for the month of October, or you are maybe reading some cozier, light fantasies. It is time to relish in that. And wherever you fall on the spectrum, there are still some frights to be had, whether it be just how many books are coming out this month, or the fact that it is 80 degrees on October 5th in Chicago today, and I am over it. I got some sun yesterday in addition to my pumpkin, and I inevitably will be sweating in this video. But I do think the heat is supposed to break either today or tomorrow, though as I told a coworker, I feel like I've been saying I just have to make it to Tuesday for like weeks at this point, so we'll see. But with that being said, we have a lot of books to dive into today. I have 35 books on my radar, and I have a book club this afternoon, so I'm going to try and get through these a little more quickly again, like I believe we accomplished last month. But as always, these are just the books on my radar. There are so many books coming out this month, so if there's something that you're excited about that I didn't mention, go ahead and leave that below in the comments. And if you're excited about books I do mention, go ahead and continue to hype those up. But before we dive all the way in, hi, my name is Melody. We talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, including monthly previews of anticipated books coming out. And if that sounds up your alley, I would love for you to like and subscribe and hang out a little bit longer. Now, some more order of business-ish before we jump fully into all of the books coming out in October. It's a little bit weird right now, especially in Chicago, right? Weird is a very understated term. I'm going to post some resources below regarding the federal presence in our city and the way that our neighbors are being targeted and their rights violated. It's fraught, it's scary, I'm heartbroken for my community, even as I'm so proud and unsurprised to see Chicago pushing back. But I would ask of you to support where you're able, and most importantly, to keep your eyes open and to keep your eyes on Chicago. I've been struggling with a lot of dissonance the last week as I am watching, firsthand reports from community members, and it's rough and it's scary and it's kind of the realization of a lot of our fears. And so I don't want to sit down today and talk about these books and not mention that, and it is kind of hard to navigate that right now. I am feeling that dissonance, so I am excited about these books. I'm going to be talking enthusiastically about these books, and at the same time I am very much thinking about my community and what is going on, so I will have that below, as well as of this posting, we are kicking off Banned Books Week, which is also incredibly important. So keep all of those things on your radar as we continue to celebrate books and recognize their importance in this moment as well. And Banned Books Week is obviously an incredibly important piece of that. These stories and these narratives are powerful, art is powerful, and seeing the humanity in all of those around us through these stories is powerful. So that being said, I would say I'd get off my soapbox, but I don't think it's a soapbox. I think it's an incredibly important just kind of check-in that we need to have, because it is our reality right now. So with that being said, it is still an incredibly busy publishing month, and these authors still are very deserving of our enthusiasm and our support. So let's go ahead and celebrate some of what we do have to look forward to amidst the madness, starting with October 7th, which I would say is a busy publishing day, because it is, but it feels like every day in October is, so let's just roll right into it. We are starting with the adult debut of YA author Stephanie Garber with Alchemy of Secrets. And I feel like this is going to be a popular through line this month in particular, in that I think there are at least 2 or 3 adult fiction debuts of really renowned YA authors coming out this month. And I think this is further illustration of a trend that we have been seeing, where we're seeing a lot of middle grade and adult authors transitioning into an adult fiction space. And I find this really interesting because it is a little bit obviously that the YA market is not what it was from like the mid 2000s through the 2010s. And it's also, I would speculate a piece of that too, is that the audience and the young adults that existed during the height of that are growing up as well, or have grown up. I'm in my mid-30s now, and I was definitely around for the height of all of that, obviously. And so I'm wondering if it's to the age of their audience is allowing them to explore these new realms. Obviously, there is an artistic impetus there as well, but I do tend to wonder what the balance is. Either way, this definitely feels like it stems organically from a lot of the kind of imagery and themes we are used to seeing as readers from her young adult fiction, though I will admit I haven't finished the Jax series. However, we are following a professor of folklore in LA as she is tracking down a local legend who is said to be able to reveal the time of your death. And he tells our protagonist Holland that she is going to die at midnight tomorrow unless she is able to obtain a mysterious ancient artifact called the Alchemical Heart. And so this pushes her further into the magical underbelly of Los Angeles, where she encounters a variety of new characters, including a potential love interest, even as she has to question throughout who she can even trust. So this definitely feels, like I said, very much similar to how we structure, or Stephanie Gerber has structured some of her other things in terms of this kind of magical element and the kind of quest of it, however that is framed, as well as this time element that adds this sense of urgency, which I do appreciate. I like that piece of it. So I will be very interested to see how this translates to an adult audience, and also seems to be more on the verge of the kind of real world, in whatever way, kind of moving into a more fantastical realm rather than it being an out and out fantasy world. So I'm very interested to see how all of that comes together, as well as if there's any differences in her voice for adult audiences. Next, we have Mothers by Brenda Lozano and translated by Heather Cleary, one of my favorite translators. Brenda Lozano also wrote Witches, which I read many years ago, though unsurprisingly, this seems like a very different book following two mothers in Mexico in the 1940s, one who is reeling after the kidnapping of her child, and the other who is struggling to become a mother, and following her journey in that and the fertility treatments she undergoes, as well as her journey in attempting to adopt and the failure of that, until she is ultimately presented with an opportunity that is too good to pass up, which does make me wonder where that swings back into how these two women's lives become intertwined based on the blurb. I have some suspicions based on the conceit of this that I'm sure you also have based on that information. And so I'm very interested in its exploration and look at motherhood, especially in this modern moment, and how we seem to be harkening back in a lot of circles to this idea of what motherhood is and what it represents, and how women should be behaving as mothers. And so I think, especially in terms of its setting, in terms of time, that is going to be a very harrowing reminder of how far we've come in terms of how we treat women and how far we still have to go in relation to how we treat women in motherhood. So I think that this will be kind of a realistic horror in a lot of ways. I'm very interested to see what that is. Next, we have a new novella from Freya Marsk, Cinder House. This, I have been off of the Freya Marsk radar for a hot second, so I do need to catch back up. I think I started Sword Crossed, so this feels much more kind of traditional fantasy than at least the Freya Marsk I started with, which was much more historical fantasy, historical romance fantasy, in a really fun way, and a way that I would posit, I think, could be what we see historical romance moving to, or what will appeal to readers with that kind of blend of historical romance and fantasy, which I think we are starting to see in other, or from other authors as well. However, this is a seemingly more straightforward Cinderella retelling with a twist. The twist being that the Cinderella in this novella is dead and is a ghost and is trapped in the house based on this, and can only be seen by her stepmother and stepsisters. And then she ends up making a deal with a fairy charm seller that allows her to leave the house, though she will always reappear at midnight on the same staircase. And so I really like the way that just the blurb is invoking the elements of Cinderella and the kind of unique twist to this that I haven't encountered before in many retellings of Cinderella that I eat up every time I encounter them. So I think that this will be really fun. And I'm also interested in what the novella offers here as well, in that I think it will allow for some really succinct, strong storytelling, because it won't be drawn out over, you know, a full-length novel. So I will be interested to see. Speaking of novellas, next we have one that I really know nothing about. I've never read this author before, but I'm intrigued, and I think I even signed up for a book event coming up for this based on the blurb and being intrigued. But Vampires at Sea by Lindsay Merbaum, and of course it is vampire season, so this feels perfectly primed, and it is a novella, so it feels like it'd be easy to just slip in. But it's about, according to the blurb, two immortal beloveds who, amidst the backdrop of ongoing war, decide to go on this queer cruise where they hope to join in on some fun of various sorts, and things kind of spiral out of control as one of the couple finds themselves drawn to an influencer. And so I'm very interested in the time setting of this. There is potential in how old these vampires are, as well as it feels like it's going to be kind of raunchy and campy at the same time, and a little absurd, which I'm intrigued by, especially as, you know, I love vampire fiction, and I love vampire fiction that takes itself a little too seriously, but also I think it might be nice to have a kind of balance to that, and I'm interested in how this enters the conversation. Next, we have a new title that's being billed as a Native American Southern Gothic and seemingly sits on the kind of precipice between mystery thriller and horror, which, you know, Gothic, and that is If the Dead Belong Here by Carson Faust. And this is following a family in the wake of the disappearance of a 6-year-old girl, and her older sister starts having dreams that blur the line between fantasy and reality. And I am especially drawn to this, or interested in this, because it says it's going to incorporate a lot of Native American folklore, and I'm always interested in the kind of bleeding of folklore into the kind of realm of reality, especially here in explorations of something like grief. Next, we have The Resurrectionist by Kathleen S. Allen, which feels like a callback to a specific subgenre of YA that I think we saw peak around the mid-2010s in relation to kind of this return of Gothic historical fantasy. This feels very much in line with a kind of modern iteration or reinterpretation of Frankenstein, in that we are following a young woman who discovers her late father's journal that includes the secrets of bringing a dead body back to life, which propels her onto a journey in discovering the medical underworld, including grave robbing. So I think especially if you were a fan of something like Anatomy, which came later than the kind of peak of this kind of subgenre of YA Gothics again in the 2010s. But I think if you liked that, this is definitely something that you should keep your eye open for, I say, without having read it. Next, we have a book that's being blurbed for fans of Our Wives Under the Sea, so obviously I am interested. We have The Salvage by Anvara Salam, which is following a marine archaeologist in the 60s who goes to uncover a Victorian shipwreck and maybe sees something out of the corner of her eye on a dive, and then is trapped on the island in wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and kind of has a flirtation with one of the workers of the hotel. And then some of the artifacts that were pulled up on this dive and from this wreckage disappear, and these two women have to try and discover what exactly is going on. Side note, I'm realizing my hands are in frame a lot right now, which is unfortunate because I'm talking with my hands in awkward ways and my nails aren't done. However, this sounds fantastic, and I'm really intrigued by this exploration of the horrors of the sea, especially as there's so much potential there to be mined with the great unknown of it all, and then this combination of the ghosts of the past in relation to this wreckage. I also feel like I've seen some early reviews from people I trust about this one, so definitely have this high on my radar. I think I already have it on hold at the library, in fact. Another entry for our popular young adult author that is making their adult debut, we have Overdue by Stephanie Perkins. Stephanie Perkins, of course, is incredibly popular for her young adult romances, primarily the trilogy that started with Anna and the French Kiss that came out in the early 2010s, and is kind of an in-between if we're kind of tracking from like Sarah Dessen to like a Jenny Han. And so it is very exciting to see an adult debut, though I have seen some early reviews that say that this debut may be very different than what the fans of her young adult romances may go in expecting. I do wonder on some level if it's going to be more similar to something like Yerba Buena by Nina LaCour in that transition to an adult title, and the kind of heartbreak that was evident in that tonally, though Nina LaCour does explore similar tones in her young adult as well. But Overdue is about a couple that agree to a break to date other people in wake of another couple getting engaged much earlier than them, though this other couple was dating for 2 years, which, as someone who has never been engaged, does feel like an adequate amount of time to be dating before getting engaged. But the couple at the center of this book, or at least the framing device, because I don't know if they're going to end up together at the end. I have concerns as an objective third party to this fictional couple that, according to the blurb, has been dating for 11 years but hasn't discussed marriage, and whether or not they will come back together at the end of this, and whether I will be rooting for that at all, and whether the romance of it is going to be the center of this. We will see. Then we have a new young adult fantasy from Nisha Sharma, Illusions of Fire, which I want to say is her first fantasy, or at least will be the first fantasy from her that I have read. And she has been billing this as for fans of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I'm like, hi, hello, that is me. Very interested in that. And we're following a young woman who is being raised by 2 adopted aunts and is the heir to a mythological bloodline. And then a new boy arrives in town who is the descendant of a demigod, and soon this upstate New York town may be the center of more supernatural happenings and maybe the next big supernatural battle. It promises romance, magic, and mythology, all of which I am here for, and with those Buffy references and knowing Sharma's other work, I am also very hopeful for the banter in this, so very, very excited for this one. Then we have the highly anticipated sequel to Bride, Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This is the third full-length Ali Hazelwood release this year. I've lost track of the side quest releases as well, but this is also seemingly going to be following a Marriage of Convenience-esque plotline, so I am absolutely there for that, and taking place in the world of Bride, which is kind of reminiscent of the supernatural romance of the mid-2000s, which is very nostalgic and fun for me, with a modern twist. So very excited about this, with the werewolf focus. We will see what we get. Then we have what is being billed as a kind of gothic Knives Out-esque romance from KJ Charles, All of Us Murderers. I say what is being billed as simply because I must admit to you in this moment, I have not seen Knives Out, but this kind of locked room kind of mystery is what I'm assuming, in which we are following a protagonist who is summoned to a remote gothic mansion for a competition of sorts in order to inherit said mansion and presumably the estate. However, the catch is the inheritance is tied to marrying the ward of whoever is setting this game up, and our protagonist walks into a room that also includes his ex, his brother, and his sneering cousin, amidst, I would assume, others. So lots of opportunity for hijinks and drama. And then finally for the 7th, we have The Penguin Book of Cults, edited by Joseph Laycock, which is part of the series that combines a lot of primary sources or excerpts of primary sources around a specific idea or topic. I am way behind on these, especially the Halloween-themed ones. I read The Penguin Book of Witches, which I want to say was the first, or one of the first, many, many moons ago, and I have The Penguin Book of Mermaids, and I need to read it. But we have since seen, I think, The Penguin Book of Exorcisms, The Penguin Book of Demons, so they really thrive in Halloween topics for sure. So I'm interested in this primarily for the exploration of older cults, especially in how we often see it kind of present in historical fiction, but definitely something of interest, and also to see where they kind of cut off in the perception of modern cults. Like, what is going to be the latest in terms of, is there anything currently operating that they are going to deem a cult, and what would the historical record of that look like in the modern moment where social media comes into play? I don't know. Moving on to October 14th, we have the next YA release from a popular YA author. This time we have Marie Lu coming out with Red City for adults. It feels very reminiscent of a lot of her young adult in premise, though I don't think I'm up to date with her most recent series. Maybe her most recent two, I would need to look. But I love Marie Lu, or have loved Marie Lu historically, so very excited about this, which is set in a kind of fantastical Los Angeles, and it's following 2 rival gangs, essentially magical gangs, that are in the market or kind of peddling this magical drug. And we are following 2 protagonists on either side who I would assume are drawn to each other even as their ambitions and survival push them apart due to their allegiances. Then we have Kill the Beast by Sarah Swift, which is very high on my radar, primarily for its blurb comparison to Howl's Moving Castle, because I am in the market for some of that particular blend of fantastical whimsy, the kind of full fantasy world, and just the voice of that and the kind of ethos of that. I love the Howl's Moving Castle movie, but there are kind of bits of the book that don't appear in the movie that I love so dearly, and I really should revisit that soon. However, here we are following a young woman who for 13 years has been hunting this mythical beast who was responsible for the death of her brother to no avail. She has been kind of coming up to dead ends until she runs across a dandy who happens to have one of the beast's claws. And she needs this claw to be able to forge a weapon to kill the beast, which pushes these two together even amidst more secrets. From the literary fiction side of things, next we have Minor Black Figures by Brandon Taylor, which seems to be following in the footsteps of his most recent works, Filthy Animals and The Real Americans, in terms of exploring kind of artists and the artistic mindset. Here, more visual artists and the kind of cultural commentary through that exploration. So very interested in what this is going to offer. I have historically really enjoyed Brandon Taylor's work. I think that he is very insightful in his drafting of character and the way that he explores character and digs into the humanity of people in his work. And I also really like the cultural critique that he offers through the deeply personal, and primarily his kind of criticism of artistic landscapes in a lot of his more modern work. So very interested to see how this is going to continue to add to that conversation. Next in a long-standing guilty pleasure tradition, we are going back to the 8th grade, at least for me, with Boleyn Traitor by Philippa Gregory. Now listen, do I know that Philippa Gregory's history is far from perfect? That she takes some major creative liberties, that maybe some of her drawings of certain historical women are not completely fair or accurate. Yes. Do I still eat it up, and is it a large contributor to my Tudor fascination in my adolescence? Also yes. And here we are seemingly returning to Jane Boleyn, this time seemingly more in her role as Lady Rochford, and apologies if I am pronouncing that incorrectly, but her role as a spy, essentially. And so I'm very interested and excited to be returning to the kind of intrigue of court through this, and I will be very interested to know kind of what historical moment we are looking at with this in particular, especially if we're starting the novel with Jane kind of living in the shadow of Anne's reign. And so I guess, are we going to be looking at a similar period of time that we did in Hilary Mantel's trilogy? Are we going to be getting to Catherine Howard? I don't know. We will see, but I'm very interested in what period we're going to be exploring. To be returning to Jane Boleyn specifically here is rather interesting, especially as The Other Boleyn Girl really, I think, is the novel that we associate with Philippa Gregory. And I'm also interested to see how I respond to her depictions of women, or how she writes these historical women in this current moment. We will see. Then we have The Princess Knight by Kate Jacobs. Rest in peace, the title Medievally Blonde, because this does seem to just be Legally Blonde with knights and princesses. And you know what? I'm still intrigued. I am a little iffy on the seeming AU of it all, but we will see. Speaking of popular movies though, in the vein of The Devil Wears Prada, seemingly, we have Workhorse by Caroline Palmer, which is exploring New York City and New York City culture at the height of magazines, and a young woman working at a prestigious fashion magazine, but the differences between workhorses and show horses, and this idea that without the right pedigree, you are doing the work in the background, and who is allowed to be in the glitz and glamour of it all, and seemingly our protagonist getting some more connection to that world of glitz and glamour. So very interested in this kind of exploration of what I presume is kind of 90s, 2000s culture in New York. But again, we'll see. Then we have Local Heavens by K.M. Fajardo, which is a fantastical queer reimagining of The Great Gatsby, which, based on my love of The Chosen and the Beautiful, despite what my book club may say, we can assume that I am very interested in, and I am indeed. I've also been hearing some great reviews from people I trust on this one, and it seems to take a more kind of futuristic approach, a little bit more fantastical, dystopian. So it's a little more sci-fi than fantasy, but this idea that those with money can kind of cheat death and reconfigure their body. So a little bit of uglies thrown in there maybe as well. But also our Nick is a hacker, so very interested in this, and it also feels like it's going to have a lot to say about the kind of modern tech climate and what that may be pushing us to. Then we have Happy People Don't Live Here by Amber Sparks, which is about a mother and her daughter that move into a new building that is full of eccentric neighbors as well as ghosts. And then one day the daughter Fern discovers a body in the dumpster, and her subsequent investigation unearths some secrets about her neighbors as well as potentially a new ghost. This feels like it might be in line with something like The Gin Waits 100 Years. Additionally though, this is Amber Sparks's fiction, like full-length fiction debut. I believe, yes, it is her debut novel. I have in the past read some of her short story collections, including The Unfinished World and I Do Not Forgive You, and especially The Unfinished World, to my recollection, I really loved. And they exist in that world of the kind of weird and odd in short fiction, which we know I love. So I'm very excited to see how that translates to a full-length novel. And then finally for the 14th, we have another release from Caitlin Starling, the author of The Starving Saints, for this year, The Graceview Patient. This is described as a claustrophobic hospital gothic, and claustrophobic definitely feels like the right word based on this blurb, about a young woman with an autoimmune disease that is debilitating, and she opts in to a medical trial, and the kind of cycle and horror of this, which I'm sure is going to be interrogating the kind of horrors of the medical system at this moment, as well as the kind of body horror of feeling trapped in your body or that you don't have control over your body, and then also that in combination with the kind of medical realities and how that's exacerbated. So this is a very specific kind of horror, I'm assuming, and a horror that will hit close to home for a lot of people, so just keep that in mind, which all feels very claustrophobic in the description. Additionally, it is invoking or kind of returning to this gothic tone that I first discovered Starling with The Death of Jane Lawrence. So very interested to return to that kind of voice. And moving on to October 21st, I got so excited I closed out my first tab too early. The first book I have on my radar for today is The Devil She Knows by Alexandra Bellafleur, which is a new kind of contemporary supernatural sapphic romance following a young woman who makes a deal with a demon to get back her ex, only to potentially fall for the demon. And really, I feel like that's all that needs to be said. Next, we have another novella, Psychopomp and Circumstance by Eden Royce, which I will admit I was first very much attracted to simply by seeing the cover posted by the publisher on Instagram. And I have since, again, seen some reviews trickle in from people I trust that make me even more excited. We are following in this a young woman who is very sheltered. Her mother has a very set life for her, and she hasn't been able to kind of break away from those confines. And so when an estranged aunt passes away, Fee gets the honor of planning her funeral, which allows her the opportunity to break away from the confines of her life and to prove herself. But there may be more lurking in this aunt's house than first meets the eye. Then we have a new historical sapphic fantasy, When They Burned the Butterfly by Wen-Yi Lee, which follows a schoolgirl, Adeline, in 1970s Singapore, who discovers her mother dead after a house fire, only to see a butterfly burned into her mother's skin, which leads her to discover a gang of girls in service to a fire goddess that her mother was leading in secret, or without her knowledge anyway, and also may tie back to Adeline's abilities over fire herself. And then we have Girl Dinner by Olivia Blake. I still have not read an Olivia Blake, and I'm not sure how I feel about the title being so referential to a TikTok trend. However, it feels in conversation with kind of the modern idea of having it all in a way that may be pertinent as we are following two outsiders to the sorority house who are seeking acceptance of these women that seemingly have it all, a new recruit as a sophomore, as well as a new academic advisor who is struggling with her identity postpartum. And so it will seemingly be looking at what it takes to be on the inside and what the cost of having it all really is. And I'm interested in the kind of dark humor that seems evidenced here, and this idea of the critique of having it all in the kind of modern influencer moment as well could be of interest, and again swing back to why we are seeing such a heavily referential title. Continuing with the 2025 trend of nights, of which I think we're getting 3 releases in this month alone, and I'm not mad about it. We have the newest fantasy from Tasha Suri, The Isle in the Silver Sea. And per the blurb, because I think this is a sentence that pulls me in right away, in a Britain fueled by stories, the knight and the witch are fated to fall in love and doom each other over and over, the same tale retold over hundreds of lifetimes. It feels very Arthurian legend in some ways, where you're falling into these cycles and story cycles and kind of subject to your fate, and how do you break outside of that. So very interested in this, as well as bringing that kind of element of story into it, and it feels like it is kind of scaled epically, so very interested to see if that tracks, as well as potentially seeing a sapphic epic in that way. And then we have Finding My Way, the newest memoir from Malala Yousafzai, and I think that this portrait and this image just really struck home to me again how young she was around the events that thrust her onto the international stage, as well as that first memoir. Also, the cover here is just stunning, but I'm also just so interested in hearing through this about her journey to live her life or build her life beyond that singular moment, while also continuing such important work, but the reminder of the humanity behind the humanitarian. Next we have Futility by Nuzo Ono, who is the author of a book we talked about much earlier this year, Where the Dead Brides Gather. Based on the cover, I do wonder if we will be adding this to a trend in accidental or not explorations of cannibalism in horror. But according to the blurb, this is following 2 women who are living in Nigeria and are offered revenge by a trickster god, and so it will be exploring themes of feminine rage. And so I'm very interested in the kind of cultural critique and exploration in relation to what kind of revenge they're seeking and how the rage has built in them, as well as I think the presence of a trickster spirit is just interesting in and of itself. Then we have Our Vicious Descent by Haley Dennings, which is the second and last in the duology that started with This Ravenous Fate, and I don't have a whole lot to say about this one other than I already tentatively had This Ravenous Fate on my TBR for this month, and this is further impetus to actually make that happen this month. And then we have a nonfiction, Pride and Pleasure, The Schuyler Sisters in an Age of Revolution by Amanda Vale. I'm just very interested to see this in-depth history of the Schuyler sisters. It's listed at 720 pages. I don't know how much of that is footnotes or sources in a hardcover, printed copy. We will see, but this seems like it's going to be a very involved history for a group of women that really didn't exist in the public consciousness pre-Hamilton. I'm not speaking of for revolutionary scholars or for those very interested in that time period, but I think that the popularity of something like Hamilton paved the way to really dive deeper into their histories in the mainstream in a way that I find very interesting and also very powerful, and am interested to get to know them more within the context of the historical record and in their work. And then finally, for the 21st, we have what I know is so many people's most highly anticipated book of the month. We have Good Spirits by B.K. Borison, and my confession yet again that I have not read a B.K. Borison, though this looks like a high contender to be my first, as this follows a ghost of Christmas past and the woman he has been sent to haunt as they have to reevaluate and journey into the past in order to examine the present and maybe find their future together. This reminds me of I would say my favorite James Patterson, but let's be honest, James Patterson did not write this book. It was written by Gabrielle Charbonnet, and she was listed as a co-author, but we all know that that was just her writing the book and James Patterson co-signing it. He had no part. I fully believe in my heart, had no part in this book, but Sundays at Tiffany's that came out in the 2000s. And that book, and I think there's a movie too. I think I've watched the movie, but the book is better as always. That is an imaginary friend romance. That Jane had an imaginary friend that she was so close with when she was younger, and reconnecting with that imaginary friend as she got older. And I have always loved this book. I haven't revisited it lately, but it holds a special place in my heart. So Good Spirits feels very much in a similar kind of vein in terms of its whimsy, and I'm here for it. Moving on, we've made it to October 28th, and it is a much lighter release day with only 4 releases I have on my radar, so we can do this. Hang tight with me. First, we have another Fantasy with a Knight, and again, I am here for all of them. We have The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. Also because I think the last full-length Alex E. Harrow we got was The Starling House, and it is the best Alex E. Harrow has ever been for me personally. It was kind of like the realization of all of the potential I saw in the previous books that kind of tripped in one way or another just a little bit for me, and so that was so exciting. And this is taking a kind of setting and themes I am incredibly interested in, and also kind of echoes The Starling House in some ways in its exploration of stories and the power of stories, which I think was super successful. And here we are following an orphan turned knight and the scholar sent to ensure that her story remains the same, even as it seems that he becomes more conflicted in that aim. So I love this idea of history and myth rewriting itself, this idea of us kind of trying to stay the course of something and how that may impact things as well, and the kind of meta level of entering the story, which I presume is all here, but I guess we'll have to find out together. I am highly anticipating talking about this one in a Feature Friday, so stay tuned. Next we have Claiming the Princess by Charis Michaels, which is unfortunately the first and only historical romance I have on my radar for this month. Now, it may just be that thematically this isn't really a month that publishers are interested in releasing historical romance, but also know that I'm keeping my eye on it because we've been watching the trends together, and we will talk more about the kind of overarching trends of the year at another time. However, this is the third in a series that I personally have not read yet. I feel like we talked about this earlier this year. It's because we did. I mistakenly had it written down for August. I think it got pushed and I didn't realize it. And that is unfortunately a theme for 2 of the books on this particular release day, but this is following an arranged marriage between a young woman who was raised by surrogate parents and did not know she was a princess, and upon discovering this, she is almost immediately married to a war hero in an arranged marriage of convenience. But the good news is I wasn't as behind on this one as I thought I was, so that's something at least. And then next we have Never Ever After by Sue Lynn Tan, which I mistakenly thought was coming out last month. I think it got pushed. I write all of these dates down in my planner based on when I see them announced in whatever way, and this has been on my radar long enough because I love Sue Lynn Tan that it must have just gotten pushed and I missed it. So I'm sorry for not paying enough attention, although sometimes Goodreads doesn't update the dates in time, and so maybe it was me, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. It is updated now, so it was me. But this is a new young adult fantasy from Sue Lynn Tan, and since we talked about it a little bit more last month, I won't regale you with all of the details again, but still very much on my radar. And then finally, one more Revolutionary Era nonfiction for the road. We have The Great Contradiction, The Tragic Side of the American Founding by Joseph J. Ellis. Ellis is one of the preeminent revolutionary scholars, and here he is diving primarily into the contradiction of the founding fathers and their upholding of slavery within the founding documents, as well as their behavior in relation to Native Americans around the founding and after, I'm assuming. I have not yet read the book, but I really appreciate that he's tackling this contradiction in this modern moment where we have mythicized these men to the point of deification in some ways, I believe, especially within certain political pockets. And I think it's incredibly important to recognize the flaws of the system, the sins of the past. It's hard to reconcile, and we are still paying the price of that division to a lot of the current events that we talked about even at the beginning of this video. And so I'm going to be very interested in this exploration and framing for sure. And with that, apologies if my laptop screen made it into frame throughout the course of this video. Surprise, I have a laptop in front of me the whole time. But that is everything I personally have on my radar right now for October. Again, there is a lot coming out this month, so I'm sure there are things I've missed. So let me know what you are excited about below. As always, I appreciate you being here and being interested in what I'm excited about. Hopefully I was able to put some new books on your radar over the course of the video, but thanks for hanging out. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good, and yeah, bye.